And welcome back to Computer America. So, we have joining us today Mr. Sean Gallagher himself. That's right, Fire Dragon Security. You know you've heard their name here on Computer America before, and he agreed to join us at such short notice to talk all about the recent hack with Equifax. And that is and this is kind of one of our first times doing a special, kind of segment for this in this kind of nature because it's such a big hack, such a big deal that they said it was something like 140 million or something like that. We'll get the exact numbers later on in the interview, but of course, that means that if you're sitting right next to someone, that means either yourself or the person sitting next to you was probably compromised in this hack. It's a big deal. We're talking huge numbers, and we're talking about, well, a lot of vulnerability because the fact that the public knows that the information is out there, you can be darn sure that the rest of the world knows that your information is out there floating around and just waiting for something bad to happen. So, joining us to break all this down, to talk about what happened, why it happened, and the steps that you can take, as an individual, as a business, to make sure that you are as safe as possible. Joining us once again, Sean Gallagher. So, Sean, thank you for joining us here on Computer America.
How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for doing the short notice. But we wanted to get this segment in as soon as possible because, it just happened last week, but I think the fallout from it is going to be happening, in the coming months, in the coming years. It's not like an instant, there's no instant solution and there's no instant, kind of summation of all the problems that this can cause. So I think and by the way, as a quick overview for everyone out there, again, Fire Dragon Security, they are a sponsor of Computer America, but for anyone out there, let's talk about your credentials and, kind of what you do to follow all the security stuff. What is Fire Dragon Security and what is kind of your background in cybersecurity to talk about this?
So, Fire Dragon we produce a IDS type device, which is an intrusion detection system. We have produced that for a couple of years now, and what it is it's meant to prevent things like this. It basically looks out and tries to see what's going on in your network, and then basically comes up with some information, sends it to you. My background is that I've been doing computers for 30-something years. I forget, it's been a long time. And I've got a bachelor, 3 masters, a couple of them in information security. So that's kind of my background.
Sure.
I think that what we run into in this is a couple things. I mean, there is the raw data portion of it. How did that happen? And from what the word is that there was what they call an SQL injection on their site, and that's how it started. I'm not going to get real technical. People that are technical will kind of understand what that is, but basically what they did is they, during the accessing of their site, they figured a vulnerability out, and they basically started inserting commands at their site. They have not been real clear on which site it is. I'm sure they have more than one. So they haven't been clear on which site that was. Was that their main site? Was it a login site? Was it a private site, an intra-site? So it's not clear of what's actually there. I'm sure the next probably 6 months or so, we're probably going to know exactly what's going on.
Well, and I mean, just real quick, if I can interrupt you, is that this hack, as far as we know, was kind of happened, or at least Equifax first learned of the intrusion back in July, if I'm remembering my months right. And we're only just now hearing about it. So, I mean, let's talk about kind of the security aspect of it, because I've heard of these things called advanced persistent threats where, this could have been happening for a while and then they just only learned about it in July. I mean, do we know kind of to what extent they were hacked? Was it just a one-time, they got their entire database, or does Equifax kind of think that this could have been, a longer-term kind of hack?
Well, I think that what we run into is that I don't think they've been very forthcoming with what is actually been hacked and how it's been hacked.
Mm.
I'm sure that this has went on for much longer than a couple weeks. This has probably been going on for probably 6 months, maybe even a couple years. It just depends upon how the data was accessed and how long it took them to access that. I think the major problem that we run into is that we're talking about basically 143 million people's lives, and because this is a agency that their primary concern is collecting data on people and intricate data, financial data, that type of stuff, it makes it very tough for anyone to look at this really objectively and say, this is going to be a situation where it's going to be okay. I mean, you have a lot of players in this arena. You have Equifax itself, which is there. You have the hackers that did this, and from all indications, that information is already attempting to be sold out on the dark web. So, that's how quickly this stuff is starting to turn.
Right.
And then you also, additionally, you have players that are on the sidelines, but are players in the situation, which are things like Bitcoin. These hackers would not be as emboldened and as easy to do all this stuff if they didn't have players like Bitcoin. I don't know what can be done about it. I don't think there's a lot, but we should all be aware that that's actually something out there that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, the idea that you can use Bitcoin and the principles behind it that keep it safe, secure, and decentralized, that kind of thing. It's also the same thing that allows people to use it for whatever means. So it's a tool, but it's a tool that can be used by two nefarious ends at least. And, we're definitely going to be seeing more of that as people's identities are stolen. So talk real quick about the real world implications, because, again, 143 million people, that's, just under half of the United States. And it's not like this was, the Shell Rewards Club card, whatever, for gasoline. This was, like you said, a business who was completely oriented around collecting data, and that includes address, names, social securities, serious, vulnerable, kind of thing. So, what can people do with the information that was compromised? Like, is this just taking out loans in your name? Is this just doing X, Y, Z? What do you think is going to be the fallout for someone who maybe was compromised?
The first thing they should know is realize if they have been compromised. I've checked on myself, and unfortunately, I've been compromised. My daughter's been compromised. My wife has not. My son is not. So, there's kind of your stat. 1 out of every 2 people have been compromised. So that's the first thing you should understand is what they've been compromised. Now there is a couple ways to look at this, and one of the things in this day and age that people should understand and should do is always understand what is happening with their credit and check on it quite frequently. There's a ton of different sites, including Equifax and TransUnion and a couple of sites that will run credit reports for you for free. Mm-hmm. So, part of is getting involved with something like a LifeLock situation, and there's a bunch of them out there to lock your credit and do those type of things. But also part of it is for you to be to have your due diligence and really look at what's happening on your credit on a consistent basis. Some people don't look at their credit for years. I look at mine, to be quite honest with you, every couple of weeks. I'll take a look at my credit.
That may be the most extreme. Something that we recommend here is definitely at least every 6 months or once a year, a couple of weeks. Like I say, extreme, but
I don't disagree. I'm over security cautious. But my suggestion is the people that have been this information has been released, that they do look on a more consistent basis. Because this information's out there, they can take out loans, they can take out credit cards, they can do a lot of stuff with that information that's been set out there. The other thing that people have to realize, too, is that there's going to be the people that are taking advantage of the situation, the scammers that are going to come in and ask them for personal information and everything else that are, that are taking and saying, we're going to try and help you clear your credit or whatever.
Mm.
So you want to make sure that whoever you're dealing with is reputable and before you give anyone any information, do your research. So you're not just throwing your information up on someone's website or giving it to someone over the phone, because that's going to come too. Because you're going to see that. I mean, you can already see the water churning out there, ready for these type of scammers to come along and say, "Hey, I noticed you've been compromised. I came to help you with your credit. I'm from Equifax or someone like that." So you want to make sure that you pay attention to that, because that's probably going to be the second phase of what's going on. Now, what I think part of the issue that's going to run into, and this is going towards more of a business legal standpoint of it,
Sure.
and I'm not an attorney, but I'm just saying the one problem that I think Equifax may run into is that no one has a contract with Equifax to an extent. These 143 million people, majority of them do not have contracts with Equifax. When you go on to a social website or you go on and do a credit card or something, you generate a contract when you sign your end user agreement or click to accept the end user agreement or a service agreement. No one has done that with Equifax. So it's going to be interesting in some aspects to kind of look to see how the court deals with this, because they really have no contract with anyone to collect and keep their data. So I know that that's something that has popped up in the last couple of days. What the legality of that is going to be.
It's definitely gonna be a big question. I've already seen a couple lawsuits come up. I think the most extreme instance of one was a $70 billion court case against them, and it sounds ridiculous, but when you break it down to an individual person, that's like $4,000 a person, across, for everyone offended. And even at that rate, it's still, that sounds about right. It's not, if anything, it's on the low side, $4,000 to have your social security card, number and everything else compromised. It's, this is definitely a big deal. So let's talk about, for everyone out there, because last time you were on the show, we talked about a couple of different instances where, the United States government was hacked, and a bunch of their contractors their information were leaked and the like. I mean, we're seeing large corporation after large corporation. Obviously, they're big targets, but they do get compromised. What can individuals do? Obviously, I don't think an individual could have really done much in this situation because, like you said, no one makes a contract with Equifax. They collect your data, without your permission. But what can people do to keep themselves safe, keep their information safe, and and especially if you're a business, keep information that people trust you with safe?
So there's a few things that you need to be aware of. Is even if you're in business and you're doing something as benign as insurance or something like that, you're collecting people's data. You should be aware of that. You should be a good steward of that data. And that's one of the things that you see popping up in a lot of companies, both big and small, is that they're still not aware that there is a lot of issues when it comes to how they store their data and how they secure their data. So, that's one thing that you should be aware of. As an individual, you're going to have to kind of realize that you just can't give your information out willy-nilly, which happens a lot. I mean, I see a lot of people put addresses and phone numbers and everything else on social media accounts, and I think to myself, why would you do that? You've got to be very much aware that information, I mean, it can not only be used by hackers, but can be used by people that are criminals and other likes. So, always pay attention to what information is out there for both you and your family, because sometimes also, too, you'll have kids putting that information out there. So, the problems you run into is giving too much information anymore. I think that in general we really give too much information about ourselves and just kind of let it fly out there. And so you have to really pay attention to that. And when you're asked, when you're sent a link or something like that because they say, oh, you've been compromised, your password, log into your Bank of America account or Wells Fargo or eBay or whatever it is, and reset your password. I always tell clients and tell people you don't ever want to click on a link. Period.
Mm-hmm.
If eBay says that you have to change your password, you type in ebay.com in your browser and you go out to eBay, confirm that that's eBay, and then you deal with it there and post it to clicking on links. Because that's where a lot of people run into problems. They click on a link, and next thing you know, they're either subject to ransomware or they're giving their password to some person, some hacker on the other side that's going to do something with it. So you want to be aware of that. Number one is that you want to be aware of where you're going on the web and where you're putting your information, passwords along with your personal information. Secondary, you want to make sure that your family's aware of that especially when you've got teenagers open up social media accounts and stuff, that they're aware of what information they can put out there and not. I know that when my kids were teenagers, now most of them are older, but when my kids were teenagers, I was very militant on what they could put out there and what they couldn't. So there should be rules set up as if there's rules set up on, how you drive, when you can drive the car or when you can leave and when you can come back, that type of stuff. There should be rules set out from the parents to say this information is okay to put out there, this information is not. So that's one thing that I think is lacking a lot in people's security and safety because, it doesn't take much to generate some type of a credit card account or some type of credit,
Right.
and we all have to be aware of that.
Yeah, it really doesn't take much, and especially with with the current hack that we're talking about, and like you said, social media, that kind of makes it oh so easy to overshare. People can really have all the information that they could possibly need. So let's let's blue sky a little bit. I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but let's talk about kind of the fallout and what you think. And this is something that I've been reading a bit about. Oh, and actually, even before that, one thing I will kind of caution you, I'm sure that you've heard about it and everyone else out there, but Equifax did set up a new website to kind of see if if your information was compromised. As I understand it, like the day it came out, there was a problem where it was actually returning erroneous results to other people. So like if two people submitted their information at the same time and were looking for a response, then their responses could get mixed up. That was something I heard. And if you want to check that again, I would probably recommend you do that. But they did set up a separate website that was also unsecure. Thank you, Equifax. What do you think was, what do you think would be the fallout of this? Do you think Equifax is going to be able to kind of survive this? Do you think that Social Security is going to have to be revamped? Because let's face it, with this many Social Security numbers out there, it's not really that secure of a system anymore. I mean, what do you think the fallout out of all this is going to be?
Well, I think that some of the fallout is going to be that some of these large corporations like the TransUnions and the Equifaxes of the world and even somewhat of the federal government agencies are going to have to realize that there is a relationship between the consumer or the citizen and the data that they collect. At this point in time, a lot of times you'll end up in a situation where people will get stuff on their credit. They can't do anything about it. TransUnion, Equifax won't talk to them, that type of stuff. And that's been going on for years and years and years. And at 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could kind of get by it a little bit because banks were not relying upon this information only to send out or to give loans and that type of stuff. They had, you had a personal relationship with the banks. That's all gone anymore. There's no. They look at the numbers. There's a number, you get a number placed on it, and they either give you a loan or they don't give you a loan. And so all we rely upon all this information to run our lives, and Equifax and TransUnion and the major players out there have been not very forthcoming with understanding that it's our data that they're dealing with. We should know things. We should be aware of things. We should be able to correct things in an easier way to correct things than is currently in process. So I think that relationship between the consumer and their data is going to change, and it almost has to change because we rely upon that on a daily basis. We rely upon it to run our lives. We rely upon it to do certain things like buy homes and cars and everything else. So between that and between the amount of data that's going to be thrown out there, I think the revamping of the Social Security system, it may come, but I'm not too. I don't believe that there's a lot of people a lot of people in Washington that are really even thinking about this. I mean, it would be nice if there was some ways to secure some of our stuff that gets sent off to the federal government, but to be quite honest with you, I'm not really positive that people are even thinking along those lines.
Right.
Which is something they should think along. But, I think that we're definitely going to see a difference in the way the consumer data is being utilized, and also what's your interaction to consumer data, because people at this point with this hack, the next couple of years, are probably going to have to get their hands dirty on their own data. They're going to have to kind of look at it and see that this stuff isn't happening, that there's that everything's correct and that type of stuff. And again, Equifax and TransUnion and all of these companies are going to have to sit back, and they're going to have to understand that they have a relationship with the person, whether they think they do or they don't. And that person is going to be the ultimate control of that data.
Yeah.
And you got to believe that if it happened with Equifax, that a lot of companies like TransUnion stuff aren't very far behind. I don't know of anything about that, but I'm just saying. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, "Man," he goes, "this is huge." And I go, "This happens on a daily basis. I mean, on a daily basis, you'll find a bank has been hacked. You'll find credit card companies have been hacked. Our own personal data from the IRS has been hacked. So this stuff happens on a daily basis. It's not as prevalent and not put out there in the media as this has been. But I can guarantee you that everyone's data has been probably hacked in the guarantee that everyone's data has been hacked within the last couple of years. Someone has lost either their data through their credit card, through a social media account, through something. They've lost some version or form of their data in that fashion, and that's kind of concerning. So, as we have control over our social media data that we put out there, we're probably going to have to end up having more control over our financial data when it comes to places like Equifax and TransUnion and those credit agencies.
Yeah, it's a situation where, it's a system that's kind of built on the premise that you have something called private information, your personal information. And at this point, if nothing is no longer private or personal, it's just out there, then you can't really build the system further upon it. So very good insight. And I'll, kind of give you one more chance to, was there any part of the Equifax hack? Because again, this is, I'm sure that you know better than I do, but I think by the numbers, this is the largest hacking that we've had, in history, and it does affect, probably a lot of our listeners and a lot of people that they may know. So was there anything else that you kind of wanted people to know about this whole situation?
Well, I think that we're going to have to, first off, I think that everyone's going to have to sit back and take it calm a little bit, because there's going to be information that's going to flow out for the next probably 6 months on exactly what happened. And I think at that point in time we can pass judgment on exactly what happened and what didn't happen. But more concerning, I think that you need to take care of yourself in this situation. Understand if you've been hacked, and then also in addition to that, understand exactly what is going on with your credit. And as you said, I'm probably more extreme that I look at my credit every couple of weeks, but I think that one of the things we all really have to understand as consumers, that we're going to have to get our hands dirty and really pay attention to these agencies, and these agencies are going to have to end up that they're going to have to provide us with more control over our own data. And that's, I think, going to have to come. I know that there's been suggestion of that. I can see this going through Congress. This is where I can see Congress really putting their teeth into something they should put their teeth into, is consumer data when it comes to credit and comes to these agencies. Because this is really don't want to put it in these terms, but I can only think of it, this is really a non-governmental government agency. These are agencies that act just like the federal government. And
I think you're right. I think that a lot of listeners out there would be surprised to hear that, credit and the entire idea of credit, that, that is what decides that if you can buy a car, if you can buy a house, if you can have some of these basic necessities of living in America, are completely, not really controlled in any manner by the federal government. It's completely private interest and private business. So no, I think you're right in that most people would be surprised to hear that.
Well, and that's one of the things I think that we need to kind of look at to make sure that these agencies, if they're not owned or dealt with by the federal government like the IRS, then they need to be in a situation where they need some type of a regulation that needs to come down hard on this type of a data breach, and they have to qualify exactly what they're actually going to do with that data and how they're going to treat it. Because in the end, that's what all that matters. Because you're right with buying a car, but even as much as going down and getting utilities turned on is something now that is tied to your FICO score, and and that affects everyone. I mean, if you're over the age of 18 and you're living on your own, even if you're living on your own, period, you're going to have to need some type of utility. You may not buy a house, but you may rent an apartment, which is going to require a FICO score, and then you're going to have to go down and get utilities, which is going to require a FICO score 9 times out of 10.
Right.
So, even something as minor as that, and it's just not. 20 years ago, it was you can buy a car, you can buy a house. That's really what the majority of the credit's being used for. Nowadays, credit's being used for almost everything that's you're involved with, your cell phone and everything else. So we have to be aware of that, and I think that these non-governmental government agencies need to adhere to the consumer, or the people's data that they're collecting, because I didn't give them permission to collect my data, and I'm sure you didn't either.
Right.
They just collected it without our knowledge.
Yep, and with that, they made a giant file on you that said, this is what this person is worth to society and how much you should trust them, and then they turned around and lost all of that information to hackers. So take from that what you will, but I think this was a very good segment, and hopefully a lot of you out there, if you have any questions, feel free to email them live at computeramerica.com, or social media, of course, you can message us there. But really wanted to put the Equifax hack into perspective, what you can do, what it's all about, and hopefully you can walk away from this knowing a bit more than you did before. So with that being said, Sean, I want to I'm going to say goodbye, but I want to say thank you so much, and thank you for joining us here on Computer America.
Thank you too.
All right, and everyone, there you have it.